He's spent over 30 years in the clinic and on the field, supporting both pro athletes and weekend warriors. Now, sports physiotherapist and Coreshorts creator Greg Bay is taking you inside the locker room with the show Injuries, Innovations, and Insights.
Welcome to Injuries, Innovations, and Insights. My name's Greg Bay, and I'm a sports physiotherapist and have been a practicing clinician for over 33 years. It's been over 20 years since the idea of superimposing the anterior and posterior diagonal sling systems onto a regular pair of compression shorts occurred. This became Coreshorts. And over the past 20 years, I've had so many people contact me for advice on how do you bring a product to market? How do you develop a business plan? What did you have to do to patent it? What type of ideas did you look at prior? So over the time, I would take these calls, and it was always about them basically telling you that your experience has really been inspirational. And what I found was that I really didn't have any time left for my own creative thinking or even just some time with family and friends. So I took on too much. So the bottom line behind that was I had to say no and be able to really pick and choose where my time, energy, and knowledge ended up. So let's fast forward to today. Right now, I've created this show, Injuries, Innovations, and Insights, as a way to connect like-minded innovators, entrepreneurs, healthcare professionals, athletes, and people that really have an interest in improving other people's quality of life. So we can be able to bring people on, have a discussion about their story and their experience, and hopefully take some nuggets away so that you can further your thinking into how you can continue to make a difference. So first of all, I thought, well, I better tell a little bit about myself. So don't usually talk about myself other than when I'm bragging. But I was born in a small town called Revelstoke, and it's in British Columbia, Canada. My dad was a railroader and started out working on the steam engines. Anyway, great little town to grow up in, lots of snow, lots of winter activities. We moved to Cranbrook, BC, which is in the Kootenays in British Columbia in Canada. And it was a very big hockey town. So most of us ended up playing hockey there. And it was during that time that I started to experience some of the sports injury side of athletics. I ended up having 6 different surgeries over a period of 4 years, 2 to each knee, 1 to an ankle, 1 to a thigh, which was, I was cutting into the net. The guy took my legs out, bang, I hit the post. And in those days, the post didn't move very far. So I ended up with a massive hematoma. The thigh was about 24 inches bigger than it should be. So then they had to do surgery, decompress, etc. So at that time, I was introduced to a physiotherapist named Blair Farish, who was from Scotland and part of the UK's army at one time, and just such a great mentor who made my rehab experience so enjoyable and pushed the heck out of me as well. So from that point, a lot of us that ended up in the health profession can always sort of pinpoint in time and a moment that somebody's created that inspiration for us. So the good news about being injured was I was probably not going to make it as a player anyway. And with that experience of injury recovery, I was off to the University of Victoria to do a phys ed degree. So while at Victoria, I ended up into the exercise science program, where again, I was surrounded by some amazing people and amazing mentors. Howie Wenger, exercise scientist, he worked a lot with the NHL doing testing, and that was so cool to hear about some of the early 1980s protocols that they were testing. Dave Doherty, Martin Collis, Bob Bell, Jerry Carr. You can go on from my first degree of people that I found so interesting, so creative. And I was never really the best student. I was so busy probably distracting everybody, but I certainly navigated towards the pursuit of knowledge from the energy that these professors had. While at UVic, I started in on the Student Athletic Trainers Program under the tutelage of Canadian icon sports therapist Dan Devlin, where I started out as the UVic student trainer. Thank you, Brian Hughes, who's passed away at this time, but he gave me my first crack. And then that was followed by ex-Canadian international Bruce Twomley. So Bruce and I remain friends today, and we spent 20 years with the national soccer team program. It was still has and is a great experience. And while at UVic, I also got to work with another Canadian great sports therapist named Brian Gastaldi. So another whole set of influences that allow you to sort of figure out what your career path is. In 1984, the spring was my first time working with the Canadian national soccer team. I was brought in as an extra taper for an Olympic camp. And at that time, I did pretty good. And that fall, I was asked to be this trainer for the Canadian youth team off to Trinidad and Tobago for the CONCACAF finals. We ended up qualifying for the World Championships in Russia in '85. And that was really the beginning of my career with Canadian soccer, which I'm still absolutely blessed every single time to represent Canada even today. So UVic was a great experience, some great highlights, and then it was off to UBC to physiotherapy, so the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And again, some great mentorship through Jane Hudson, the late Jane, and she had hands like pillows and some amazing stories to tell. And at that time, sports therapist Clyde Smith, Ron Madison was there. So we had some amazing influencers as well that got you excited about the profession. So I ended up having the ability to work with a guy named Barry Crocker, who was a trainer with the national soccer team. And previously, Barry had worked with the Whitecaps. And there was a spot open in Abbotsford, BC, which is about an hour drive from Vancouver. And I got to go work with a gentleman named Cliff Fowler. And Cliff was an Army physio for the UK, spent time in Malaya at the time. And he was also one of the founders in Canada for manual therapy. Was one of the first to do acupuncture and introduce electrical stim and TENS. So he's a real beginner, original thinker, and certainly a huge mentor over time. So I went out to Abbotsford specifically for that and never left. Get that. Thought I'd be here for a few years. And I know a lot of people out there have the same story. So, well, in Abbotsford, we would often get together on Fridays and have a social time and also discuss some of the cases that we saw throughout the week and also just review some of the papers that were out so we could stay current on the literature. So a Friday afternoon would often be Cliff Fowler, Earl Petman, another most amazing educator in the orthopedic physiotherapy world, orthopedic surgeon Rick Sweeting, and a chronic pain specialist, Dr. Vin Pratt. And quite often we would be blessed with Diane Lee coming out, every now and then Carol Kennedy as well. So some of my great physiotherapy mentors. And it was always a treat. One day I spoke up and gave my 2 cents about a topic, and everybody turned and looked at me and said, I think you better come back next Friday with the information and then you can present it to us. So the next Friday I came back with the research and the info, and I was darn well prepared, and I earned my right to sit at the table and have a beer with these mentors and icons. So a little background about my education through the manual therapy. I thought that I'd better do manual therapy first, and I've always had a love and a passion for sports, and that was the easy part for me. Well, I can tell you that at that time, we had Part A's, which was the extremity part of manual therapy, and then the Part B, which was the manipulation spinal part. Uh, my first two Part A exams, I failed. So study like crazy, fail, study like crazy, fail, then get by and pass. And it was like, oh my gosh, I have a million excuses and reasons. But in the end, then it was on to Part B. My first time I took the Part B exam, I failed. I'll tell you what, I had a whole huge bowl of humble soup because you come from a time when you've never failed an exam to getting completely smoked in over a period of 5 years. So I knew the material really well, which allowed me to get into teaching because at that time, every year for 5 years, I was studying for these exams. And from that point, our education was really through, again, my mentors of Diane Lee, Jan Lowcock, Carol Kennedy. And at that time, May Nolan, Robin Wells, and I came up as a group, and it was always good to have a study group. So it was a lot of fun teaching in the manual therapy division. In particular, Robin and I did a lot of teaching at the preliminary level. Robin's the only person I know that could spend 3.5 hours teaching how to take a history, because every question you asked had another question and another question, and what did it mean? So by the time you're done your history and knowing why you asked the questions, it gave a lot of relevance. And of course, nowadays we often say that your physical exam should be a way to confirm or deny what you've taken in the history. So it was a great experience. So a number of mentors. So we get to fast forward a little bit to one of the evenings when we're 1999. We're sitting having a few beers at Finnegan's Pub. There was myself, Ted Tilbury, a great physio, Greg Guizzo as well, Cliff Fowler, and exercise scientist Dr. Greg Anderson. And we would often get together to discuss papers and, again, just similar to what we did previous years, and share information. Well, this time I was complaining quite a bit about the fact that I really didn't like the hip spicas. I didn't like teaching them because it was either right or left or internal or external rotation, and the angle was wrong. And in the end, we were chatting about it and decided that something's got to be more simple. And an X was drawn on the back of a beer coaster, slammed on the table, and said, "That's it. There's the answer right there. We need to produce a pair of shorts that has a built-in anterior and posterior diagonal sling, both right leg, left leg, front and back." And it was like, yeah, the light bulb moment went off. So after that, it was really about putting your money where your mouth was. So I ended up finding, thanks to Diane, a specific seamstress who worked in the movie industry named Brenda Knight. And Brenda decided to take my project on, and we started to produce prototypes. And it was about 6 to 7 months later, we had about 9 different prototypes done before we got one that actually fit somebody and they could move in it. It was a complete disaster, the first few, trying to figure it out, sourcing out elastic, fabric, stitching, etc. So off we went with a product. And that product that was born in 1999 started to become a reality. I had no idea where I was taking this. All I was trying to do was say, yeah, I can produce this. I didn't have a thought about the business plan behind it, but I did know that I was spending a lot of money. So we created samples in 2000 to the point where I thought, yeah, I like this design. And then under the advice of a patent lawyer at Owen Wiggs, Green and Mutula in Vancouver, I got connected with a terrific patent lawyer, and we started in on our searches. We got the designs done. We got a patent application in. Started out in the U.S. in 2001. We ended up getting a patent on the X design. It was in 2002 that we got Canada and 5 European countries. At that time, you couldn't get each European country as a group, which you can today. So I deliberately chose the UK, Spain, Germany, France, and Italy, primarily because of their hockey and soccer. So I certainly didn't have the money to take every country out, but I thought if I had those countries, at least I would have the bulk of them. So then it was a great time because at that point I could start exposing the product way more. So I had soccer players wearing some of our prototypes, and hockey players around, sent them to a few NHL teams. They were excited. They couldn't believe how potentially ugly they were. They were all white, and they were really made of sort of this medical fabric. So one of the things that came back from the NHL was, hey, how do we know that this product isn't going to injure our athletes or it's going to hinder performance? So the first study that we had to get done, and thanks to Dr. Greg Anderson and Teresa Bernhardt, who did a study in 2003 called The Influence of Modern Prophylactic Compression on Performance, was that we looked at 5 performance variables and measured them with and without the shorts. And the answers were that wearing the old version of the shorts did not impede performance. So at least we could say to the trainers, hey, we can't tell you on everybody, but here's what the study showed based on these parameters. So it gave us some credibility. And certainly the feedback we were getting from players was that there was nothing else out there like it, and they thought it was pretty good. On that hand, I knew that it had to be better. So believe it or not, over that 3 or 4 years of getting this thing done, it actually, financially was about $200,000, primarily because I had no clue what I was doing. I wasted a lot of money, although it's never wasted. It's called experience. And it ends up, it ends up being okay by the time you're done. But I can tell you that by somebody that knew what they were doing would be a lot more efficient, both in time and in finances. So it takes us up to 2003, where I've got a pretty good product. At least I've got some beta testing, and the NHL was awesome, and the professional soccer guys that I knew, it was awesome. And I got asked to work on a movie, and it was called Miracle, and starring Kurt Russell, about the 1980 U.S. Gold medal hockey team. I mean, boy, for a guy that knew the story, it was awesome to be around it. So one thing you know about working at a movie is that when they say action, it's only for a few seconds. Otherwise, you're sitting around for the rest of the 23 hours that get attached to it. So I'm sitting in the stands, 2003, and I start talking to this gentleman beside me named Ed, and we were just bantering, and I'm a sport physio, and yeah, I'm looking after all the equipment, I'm advising on the movie, and okay, well, what else did you do? And he says, well, I was the head equipment guy for the Ottawa Senators for years, and before that I was the head equipment guy or assistant equipment at the Canucks, and before that sort of a student equipment guy with BC Lions. So, okay. And he says, what about you? And I says, well, I'm a physio, but I do a lot of sports. I work with the national soccer team, and I've got this project going called Coreshorts. It's a compression short for groin injuries. And he looks at me like I got 3 eyeballs, and he says, I know those shorts. And I went, wow, how? He says, we had them in our dressing room. He says, they were ugly shorts. And I says, yeah. He says, yeah. He says, but I'll tell you what, I think you're on to something. And then he said to me, what do you got going for business? I says, I'm actually not sure where I'm going with this. And he says, I can help you. And at that moment in time, not only were we on the set of Miracle, that all the stars and the moon collided for Ed and I to get together and take a look at starting a business together. So that's the beginning story from Greg Bay. That's where I came from. That's up until 2003. And every story's got some sort of beginning. But what I'd like to do for podcast number 2 on injuries, innovations, and insights is fill you in what happened after our meeting in 2003, getting the product to market, then getting our to the Dragon's Den on the Discovery Channel, and then signing a multi-year deal with Under Armour. So stay tuned for that part of the journey, and we will explain to you and go through some of the things that we were really happy about, some of the things that didn't work. So far, the shorts were not just born out of a single idea over beer, but really a framework of innovation and thinking. And I can't help people that I've been surrounded with for allowing my brain to always create another question. And then to be pushed once you said you're going to do something. There's always got to be somebody that holds you to task. So that's it for today. And podcast number 2 is going to be continuation into part 2 of Coreshorts. And we just hope you had a good time today, and that you think if there's any value behind this, that you get to share it with others, because the whole point is that as we continue this podcast on, that we'll be sharing a lot of information from athletes, therapists, researchers, and entrepreneurs. So thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.